It's rare for a doctor to admit that medicine is a broken system and to leave the conventional world of healthcare behind and search for something better. But that's exactly what our guest today has done. She's a Stanford-trained physician, co-founder of the health technology company Levels, and an author. She's also on a mission to redefine the health conversation and reverse the world's metabolic health crisis. This is the story of good energy with Dr. Casey Mean. Dr. Mean, so nice to have you on.
So nice to see you, Casper. Thanks for having me.
I was actually first introduced to you through an article that you wrote entitled, "I'm a Doctor, You Shouldn't Always Trust Us." And that just stuck out to me. My father's a doctor, my mother's a doctor. I work with doctors all the time. Oftentimes they are not trusted and sometimes complain about that. But it was a poignant article. It was very emotional, heartfelt. Can you tell us about that story and what basically got you to finally write that and release that to the world?
Ooh, absolutely. I think the real crux of why I made a statement that bold comes down to a simple reality that I did not fully understand when I entered the medical system, but I certainly awoke to 9 years into my training, which is that the reality in America is that every institution that touches our health, from the doctor's office to the hospital to the pharmaceutical companies, even the insurance companies, they make more money when we are sick and they make less money when we are healthy. And that's just the stark economic reality of it. And so you are working in this system that you have gone into as a doctor with the best of intentions. Every single doctor I know, probably like your father and many that you know, went into medicine to help people. But the reality is that healthcare is a business, and that business is designed to grow. And healthcare is actually the largest and fastest growing industry in the United States. It's over 20% of our GDP. And that reality of the fact that it is a business designed to grow, and the economic model right now is predicated on growth being related to more patients in the system for a longer period of time, having more things done to them. What that does is it creates a massive invisible hand that unfortunately influences and corrupts every aspect of our medical culture to not be focused on actually preventing and reversing disease and promoting human flourishing and thriving, which of course would get people out of the system, and instead promotes a system from the medical education to the how research is designed and done to how doctors practice, that is fundamentally focused on waiting until symptoms and diseases emerge and then doing things to the patient. And we've seen the chronic disease explosion over the past 50 years, with really disease being so much more of a long-term thing that we manage as opposed to what it used to be, which is really acute issues, things that would crop up and the medical system would intervene and, people would be on their way. Now we're seeing these diseases that start young and go on for decades. And frankly, chronic disease is the ultimate economic boon for our healthcare system, because you have people that need to be quote unquote treated or managed for life. This is extremely, extremely profitable. And so what you see happening, unfortunately, because of these economic realities is that we actually, as a doctor, we are literally not even trained to understand the root causes of disease or the connections between these seemingly different chronic diseases that we're facing in the United States. And instead to just really look for these downstream symptoms and signs and manage them. And so this is why what we're seeing is that as we spend more every single year on healthcare, literally increased spending every single year, outpacing the rate of inflation, the outcomes are actually getting worse. So the more we spend, the worse the outcomes are getting. The more we spend, the more life expectancy is declining. And so there's clearly something that's not right. And I think that the message that I'm trying to get across is we all, as individuals and doctors, need to wake up to the realities, the true foundation and structure of this system, and just be eyes wide open so that we can start to advocate for our own health and for our own thriving because unfortunately the system's not incentivized to do that for us. And so the book is fundamentally about this from the inside perspective I had as a head and neck surgeon who had been deep in the belly of the beast, climbing that ladder, believing in it, and then really having a disillusionment when I was so deep in it. And also my mother's story, who is unfortunately, tragically, one of the victims of this system, where she had so many of these symptoms and diseases sort of start to accumulate throughout her life, like so many Americans do. All the sort of rites of passage of American life, the high blood pressure, the high cholesterol, the high glucose levels, the weight gain. And in our system, unfortunately, all the different specialists saw these as different things, didn't really look for that root cause, didn't see these emerging diseases and symptoms as fundamentally signs that there was an underlying core problem and addressing that. And so she fell prey to whack-a-mole reactive medicine and ultimately got a cancer diagnosis that took her life. And my mission with this book, Good Energy, is to show people that what we actually know is that almost every chronic disease in the United States right now is fundamentally rooted in metabolic dysfunction, which is addressable and reversible. And we have to start looking at that upstream cause, tying these conditions together, focusing on the real problem. And I think what we would find if we did that, if we pointed that $4 trillion arrow towards the right problem proactively, a lot of the suffering in our country would melt away and we'd avoid a lot of these lethal diseases that fundamentally we are getting so many signs and signals of early on, but we're just not seeing them for what they are, which is early signs of metabolic dysfunction that can be addressed and reversed. So that's really the call to action of Good Energy, is a reimagination of how we practice healthcare in the United States, and a sense of empowerment for people to take their metabolic health into their own hands.
It's really interesting because as someone that went to business school, I kind of understand where healthcare is coming from. The companies, their fiduciary duty to their stockholders is make money. And so you could understand it's really sick care system that is all profit driven. And of course, you'd want to teach the doctors to stay in line with that system and continue to make more and more money, as we've seen throughout the pandemic, throughout all, the past few decades. These companies have made much more money. But it was interesting, even in reading the beginning of Good Energy, you wrote about the case of Sophia, who you performed surgery on. And as soon as she got out of surgery, I believe she said, "You saved my life." Right? And it wasn't even probably a few minutes. And you went on to write that, I didn't feel proud. At best, I felt I relieved the downstream symptoms, but I had done absolutely nothing to cure the underlying dynamics.
Yeah.
So there you were saying, I didn't do much, yet the patient said, "Hey, you saved my life." What do you think it is on the patient side that kind of said, you gave all these stats, we're sicker than ever, we're spending more money, but yet you do see patients that say, "You saved my life, thank you," even though they'll probably come back with something
Mm,
worse very soon.
mm. Yeah, I think that we have, on every level, even in the way that we have sort of trained patients to think about their body and think about the disease, we've trained people to see an intervention-based model of healthcare as really the pinnacle, the gold standard. And so because the system is designed that way to really put these heavy-duty interventions on a pedestal, of course that's what patients are going to want and ask for, because we're all asleep. We're all asleep at the wheel here. And so we've done a lot, I think, to actually honestly train patients to accept and desire and be dependent on this model that is fundamentally, when it comes to chronic disease, is abjectly failing them.
Mhm.
The more medications we're prescribing to them for chronic disease, the more the rates of these diseases increase. So it's clearly not working. And yet we have created a system in which people are dependent on it, and then divorced people from a sense of their own innate empowerment in being the CEO of their health and being the owner of their health. And I think a lot of it is really by design. You look at the way that like health records and access to our own data is structured. And in many ways, we actually keep the patients from their own data, and we make it very difficult to even access your own health information. And we say, it's really complicated and you need a doctor to interpret this. It actually could be dangerous if you have too much of your own information. And my message in this book is it's actually not that complicated. It's actually quite simple to understand your own biomarkers and understand the core physiology that's leading to most disease in the United States. And we all should understand that. It is our own bodies. And so there's definitely this sort of paternalistic, separatist environment in healthcare that I think infantilizes patients and makes them codependent, on the system. We also do something really, I think, quite dark in healthcare, which is in the West, which is we really weaponize, I think, the fear of death against patients. In so many other cultures in the world, I would say Eastern traditions, more indigenous, native cultures, there's so much more of a curiosity and an engagement with the concept of death. You read Chinese poetry or, and you see people really grappling with these themes. You look at the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Lao Tzu, all these other traditions, and everyone's sort of grappling with this. In the United States, we are petrified of death. We don't talk about it. It's very scary. We have a very binary view of life and death. You're a body that's alive, and then you're a body that's dead. We don't see the human body for what it is, which is actually this miraculous evolving process. We're just like this swarm of energy and matter that's constantly sort of evolving throughout our lives. And what's beautiful about that and really understanding what the body really is on that energetic molecular level is that we realize that because we are this incredible dynamic entity, there's so much we can do to improve it because we're not a static thing. And every time we eat, healthy food, that gets incorporated into the structure and builds a healthier body. But so we've got this very sort of limited Western binary view of the body, life and death, separate from other things. And then the healthcare system, what they do is they really engender that fear. So it's like, if you don't get this surgery, if you don't take this pill, you just might die. And I think there's something really actually deeper and sort of despiritualized about the way that we're approaching healthcare that creates this sense of disempowerment in people. I think when we actually address these things, we examine some of these deeper things around death and spirituality. What actually happens is in that acceptance of sort of, the realities of our life and curiosity with it, it actually helps us approach health and healthcare from a place of more abundance and reality that makes us more empowered consumers, because there's not this little, carrot being hung over the patient's head that is such a grip. And I think I saw it very clearly. I think when I was deciding to become a surgeon after my fourth year of medical school, as a fourth year medical student, you basically are like picking from 42 medical subspecialties about what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And surgery is definitely glorified so much more over these medical specialties because it's that intervention base, it's that top of the totem pole, top of the pyramid. And I remember thinking surgeons were heroes because they would just dramatically go in there and cure disease and fix disease. And if you think in your head, in your mind's eye of who is the most heroic kind of type of doctor, I think a lot of people would be like a brain surgeon or a heart surgeon, the crack in the chest, getting the bone saw out, redoing the heart. And what I realized as I kind of went through my training was that, a heart surgeon, fundamentally what they're doing is they're kind of doing like a plumbing rearrangement of blood flow. So if you have coronary artery disease and there's a blockage, these huge surgeries that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and the patient's in the hospital for days or weeks after surgery, it's just rearranging the blood flow. It's literally creating a new path of blood for blood to flow around a blockage that's caused by metabolic dysfunction. And then you look at someone in the hospital like a nutritionist, and there's just no comparison in how people would think about a heart surgeon or nutritionist. The heart surgeon's a hero. Nutrition is kind of an afterthought. It's wimpy. But what's incredible is that the nutritionist, if the patient actually follows what a good nutritionist is talking about, like a true functional nutritionist, that patient has the potential to reverse their heart disease, to reverse the plaques in their heart, to actually totally change the physiology of the body and be able to live so much longer and probably avoid several other diseases. So the surgeon's the hero. The nutrition approach is the wimpy approach. And that is really the crux of the problem is that if you take a patient who takes the more gentle, nudging approach of health, what they will often hear from the doctor is, I wouldn't recommend that.
Hmm.
I don't know if we have a lot of time here. You really need to get on that statin. You really need to have this stent. You really need to have the procedure, because they're holding that existential fear over the patient that pushes them away from the gentler, longer sort of nudge interventions like nutrition that
Hmm.
actually will fundamentally heal the patient and pushes them towards the intervention model. So long story short, I think that patients unfortunately have been trained to be somewhat dependent on this system by design. And my goal is to really blow that up and help people realize that it's actually simpler than we think to be healthy. And every single person, I believe, has the knowledge and tools right now, living at this time in human history, to take control of their health. And they just really need a guidebook for that the healthcare system's not giving them.
And it seems like we need it more than ever. You wrote, what is it, 93.7% are metabolically dysfunctional right now. That's
Right.
an insane number. If you
Yeah.
look at US adults, to say there's only about 7% of us, let's say, that are metabolically functioning properly. And
Yeah.
so you have this abundance of people that are at this disadvantage and absolutely, one foot in that chronic disease pitfall. Where do people start? Is it with the diet? I know you have so many different elements here in the book, which are great to read about, from sleep to movement to, even breathing and more of these fearlessness type patterns
Yeah.
that you discuss. But do we have to start with what we are actually putting into our body on a daily basis and really reevaluate our relationship with food?
Absolutely. I think you look at all the health behaviors that we talk about and I talk about in the book and that so many people are talking about, and I think that fundamentally it does have to start with food. What blows me away so much is that the average human eats 70 metric tons of food in their lifetime. And this is not a substance that's just passing through the body. This is literally 70 metric tons that every single day is constantly being incorporated into our form and discarded from us in this incredible sort of transformer process. And so, the body we are today is not the body we were a year ago. It's completely molecularly different. And that is incredible. So, we have this like football field worth of food that is essentially going to be 3D printing the version of our body for tomorrow. And so there's no getting around that. We've got to get that right, because not only is it our form, it's literally the molecular composition of our body and our proteins and our fats and our cell membranes and literally our DNA, but it's also the instructions. So it's both the form and the instructions. These food molecules are going into our body, going into our cells, and in many cases changing gene expression, changing the epigenetic folding of our genome. So they are form, they are signaling and function. And then the third incredible thing that food does is it feeds and signals to our microbiome, which is, of course, the other body living inside our body of 100 trillion cells, far more cells, bacterial cells in our body than human cells, and telling them what to do and which of those species to propagate versus die. And so these microbiome cells are taking in the food and then they're doing their own digestion of the food and creating these chemical byproducts that dictate every aspect of our health and happiness, literally making our neurotransmitters, making short chain fatty acids that tell our mitochondria how to function. So structure, signaling molecules, and shaping the microbiome is why food just has to come first. If we don't get food right, it's very, very hard for anything else to work properly, because we essentially become just broken machines. Um, and I think what's so incredible to just also understand about food is that, the food is essentially the food is outside of us and then becomes us, right? So it's eating is this incredible transformation process of taking essentially environmental potential energy and sort of cosmic energy and matter and turning it into ourselves, which is really miraculous. And so we just really want to make that as high quality of interaction as possible. Right now, when you look at that 70 metric tons that we're eating, unfortunately, because close to 70% of the diet is now ultra processed, industrially manufactured food, so far from really being alive. It's so dead, it's so depleted, it's so altered that we are building ourselves, close to 70% of ourselves, with this really broken material. So, of course, we're all getting sicker every year. Even if you are eating a perfectly whole foods diet, it's still challenging to make the most of that 70 metric tons because the soil the food is being grown in America is actually depleted because of industrial agriculture. So not only are the whole foods we're eating depleted in nutrients because we have abused the earth with industrial agriculture over the past 70 years, but also the calories we're choosing to eat have been further depleted by industrial processing. So the best piece of advice I can give after being in the healthcare field for 15 years is buy your food from as close to from your farmers as possible and eat it as close out of the ground as possible, because every day that food is out of the ground, it's going to lose its nutrient composition. The average piece of food in the United States is traveling 1,500 miles to your plate. And so there are, many thousands of farmers markets across the country. And I would say that, people think it's frivolous, maybe elitist to shop at farmers markets, but I would say it should be one of our highest priorities, because fundamentally what you want to do is get as many of those 70 metric tons to be filled with as many nutrients as humanly possible and as few pesticides and toxins on it. That is the foundation of a form, of a structure, which is your body, that is going to be able to help you reach thriving, highest purpose in this one lifetime. So buying food from farmers markets, talking to the farmers about how they're tending to their soil is by far the easiest way to I believe be healthy.
Yeah. It seems though that so many people are getting this different pieces of information when it comes to food. And I could understand why when I was reading your book. It says right here 82% of independently funded studies show harm from sugar sweetened beverages. 93% of industry sponsored studies reflect no harm.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear probably the 93% and say, what's wrong with my Diet Coke, my Coke, all of that. It says it's, if anything, it could help me lose weight, which we know, Diet Coke actually probably put more weight on. If you were in charge, and you had this ability to just write out these executive orders and say, hey, enough is enough, guys, like this is crazy. What would be your first steps to changing this around and getting that influence out, plus allowing people to really see to the truth of what food is?
Yeah. We have to get money, corporate money out of the research field, because research has been so corrupted that conflicts of interest are now the norm rather than the exception. 95% of the people who were on the USDA advisory board for the USDA food guidelines had direct conflicts of interest with processed food companies. And so it's astronomical how much that is, of course, going to change the way research is designed and executed. We have academic institutions and hospitals that take federal money, also taking corporate money. Mm-hmm. We have the NIH taking federal money and taking corporate money. 75% of the FDA's operating budget comes from the pharmaceutical companies. 60% of advertisements on mainstream media are paid for by the pharmaceutical industry. So at every level, from the information that we are getting on the news to the papers that we are holding up as evidence-based research, are just absolutely corrupted by corporate interests that in their best interest, of course, is to get people addicted to and eating as much ultra-processed foods as humanly possible. Lobbying from the food industry and the pharma industry is astronomically higher than lobbying from the oil industry. So it's really got its fingers, the influence of money in everything, and that is why a chapter of my book, there's 2 chapters that I think really get at this, which is your body has the answers and
Mhm.
trust yourself, not your doctor. And those things can sound a little scary, I think, but the beauty of this exact moment in human history, and the reason I'm actually so optimistic, despite the trends that seem very bad in human health, is that just in the last couple of years, we have access now individually to more health data about ourselves, with the click of a button on the computer than we've ever had in human history before. More information about ourselves than our doctors could even have told us throughout our lifetime. So right now you can go online, you can order 100 biomarkers from your blood and walk into a lab and have those done the next day and learn all about the functioning of your body for less than $500. Right now you can go online, you can order an Aura Ring or a Whoop or a Fitbit, and you can understand your heart rate variability, your resting heart rate, your sleep trends, your oxygen saturation. You can also get a biowearable like a continuous glucose monitor that can literally tell you how your metabolic health is, how your insulin sensitivity, a proxy metric for insulin sensitivity, which is fundamentally a process that is so critical for all aspects of health. So we have access to these tools now that can really confirm for us how we're doing. And I think the diet wars and all the confusion that people feel about nutrition, what people need to realize is that the entire point from these industries is to confuse you.
Mhm.
Nothing is more beneficial to the processed food industries and the fitness industries and the influencers and even the different, medical ideologies than to make you feel that it is very confusing. Because what does that then get you to do? It gets you to go buy a million different solutions for this confusion that you're feeling to quell your anxiety about your health destiny. And so if we can start to have the literacy to just understand like the basic biomarkers and tools to basically understand exactly how we're doing and be able to say with confidence, like, I am healthy or I am not healthy, and here's why, we blow through all that noise. So I think this advent of direct to consumer access to testing for cheaper and cheaper prices, I'm hoping it just completely squashes the nutrition wars and the mass confusion that's just driving us to basically grasp for whatever solution seems palatable to us today. If someone has key biomarkers in the optimal range, metabolic, hormonal, cardio biomarkers, and they feel incredible and have no symptoms, so someone's biomarkers are optimal and they feel incredible, then they are most likely on the right diet for them. They are on the right diet for them. And that could be different for different people. But it really kind of ends the debate. If my fasting glucose is 72 and my insulin is 2 and my vitamin D is 50 and, my hemoglobin A1C is 5% and I feel absolutely incredible every morning, I literally don't care what anyone else has to say. I can say I am on the right diet. And so I really want people to lean into that sense of empowerment of my body has the answers. My body's constantly speaking to me through symptoms and how I feel. And it can also speak to me through these tools and technology that are brand new that can help me understand my health. But I just 2 other things to mention that I think just kind of tickle me. One is that, think about this trend. Every single year, we're publishing more papers, scientific research papers on nutrition and fitness. Every single year, like from the last 30 years, if you look on PubMed, the number of papers published about nutrition, it's like an exponential curve. Every year, it's more. And in that exact same period of time, our health in America has plummeted and obesity has risen. So the more research we're doing, the worse the outcomes are getting. That's perplexing. There's something wrong about that. And so it's just important to remember the confusion is by design. We
Mm.
are also the only species on planet Earth with experts And we are the only species on planet Earth with a chronic disease epidemic. So there is something happening here where we're being asked to be divorced from our internal knowledge, intuition, wisdom about what is right for our bodies, hand away all our judgment to institutions of trust, and the outcomes are getting worse. So we need to get back in touch with our innate knowing about what's right for our health and for our children's health and for our families, and regain our confidence in our self-direction for our health destiny. And there are, of course, this book is helping people on that path that can feel a little scary.
Yeah. The book has so many empowerment tools within it, and there are even the technologies we can utilize now to say, are we truly healthy or not? Are our markers there where they need to be? I'm not sure. Well, you could answer those questions and get there. But then there's the other side of that there are so many, as Darren Olian, who I've had on the podcast, wrote about a book, Fatal Conveniences. And these are conveniences that, we kind of accept because we want things easier. And then when we get to that point of becoming sick, we allow conventional medicine to step in and give me a pill for the ill sort of approach. Do you feel that beyond the empowerment tools that you outlined here and everything else, that we need to have a fundamental change in where we place health and not wait for problems to occur and then just address them with pills and things that manage the disease, but truly put it at the pinnacle, that it should be number one? And again, there are a lot of people out there that, can afford, let's say, even these interventions that are more preventative, but they would rather spend it on a car. They would rather do this. I mean, most people know nowadays that McDonald's isn't very good, yet it's still growing. It's still, do you think that conversation also has to take place of, hey, do we even value our health? Like, even if we give you all the empowerment tools, are you going to apply it? Because there are these conveniences in doing things that are not healthy.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I certainly have heard a lot of people in my life personally, and also as a physician, who have proudly stated, I'd so much rather eat this food, insert junk food, and shave 5 years off my life than
Right.
give up this thing that's bringing me so much pleasure. And that's where I think there's really an awareness piece that is so much more than just a physical health awakening. I think it's much more of a spiritual awakening that we
Mm-hmm.
have to start to bring back into our culture. You know, there's been some incredible books that have been written that get out at this over the last few years. I would say Hacking of the American Mind by Rob Lustig, Dopamine Nation by Anne Lemke, Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. These books get at this idea that, and fundamentally, I think it's rooted in our economic reality of capitalism. And I'm not in any way anti-capitalist at all, but I think the way that the economic structure of our country has sort of emerged is that essentially the dollar and productivity is our God in this country. And we're all working towards that. And so we have really have a very despiritualized culture where we really don't understand anymore what our true value is and our true nature as people. I think that we are not even speaking in school or to children about this reality that, like, we are miraculous. Like, the fact that we are here as people is truly a statistical near impossibility. It's a miracle that we are living in an eternal, infinite universe. And at this moment in time, from the explosion of the Big Bang, matter's been hurling through space and somehow has become a constellation that has pulled in consciousness, and we're here talking. And so the just total lack of awe and the drive towards busyness, productivity, earning, they're in conflict. And so what that has led to on a biochemical level is this huge drive for essentially dopamine. And that's what those books that I mentioned are all about, is we're on this treadmill of pleasure and of productivity. And we've really lost the deeper sense of happiness and joy that comes from, I think, a true meditation on the miraculousness and awe of life. You see this everywhere. I mean, we've totally despiritualized and sort of sterilized even like the birth process and the pregnancy
That's right.
process. We just sort of look at these as inconveniences when in fact, we could really look at it and say like this is incredible. We're 3D printing from cosmic matter a human that somehow has consciousness, and instead it's just like how quickly can we get in and out? How quickly can we do it? And so to answer your question, I think it's there is going to have to be, I think, a turning for our culture towards a slower, more grounded, more joyful and awe-inspired foundation to the health conversation, or it's going to be really hard to turn the ship around. The why has got to get back to being deeper. And I actually think we're in a moment in human history where this may happen.
Right.
And the reason for that is because everyone knows that something is not quite right with humanity right now.
Mm-hmm.
There is just this sense of discontent that I think is very present in the air, where people are realizing like we're going on this path and we're going hard, but like it's not quite right. The children aren't quite right.
Yep.
The health outcomes aren't quite right. The economy is going in a weird direction. People are not happy. Why are all the kids medicated? Why are all the women medicated? Why is everyone taking all these pills and staring at their phones? And we're literally inside 93.5% of the time. Something's not right. We all know it. Why did we all just like blindly agree to lock ourselves in our house and think that we didn't need to interact with other people when there was really no data to support that? So there's sort of this, I think, growing sense and vibration in the world that like there's something deep and fucked about the way we're living. And I think that's going to help. I think we're seeing some light emerge that people are seeking more depth than what dopamine can give us, and starting to set some of the boundaries to move away from that. So I'm starting to see hints of that. And I think it's going to have to start with there. And that's why I actually think in some ways the wellness and health conversation are actually fueling the problem, because we are, you see what's really performing the best in like the health conversation. And it's the hacks, it's the protocols, it's the longevity, it's the optimization, it's how many minutes of cold plunge do I need per week? And how do I start my morning? And I think that a real message I have in the book is like, yes, those things are important. We do need to do the wellness behaviors, but we need to understand why we're doing the wellness behaviors. And it's not to add 2 years to our lives or to get our biomarkers down. In my perspective, it's to build a form, this dynamic entity of the body that has the function, the metabolic function, which is fundamentally metabolism is how we transform food energy to human energy to power our consciousness. It's to build a structure that has good function so that we can reach our highest purpose and we can actually go on that miraculous human spiritual journey of understanding our true natures as miracles. And I think when it comes from that place of honoring the miracle, honoring this ability to want to connect with, everyone has a different belief system, but to connect with the divine, connect with the divine within us. We are duality, right? We are physical and consciousness. And if we can improve the physical, we can get closer to, I believe, that bliss of understanding this limitless nature within us. But that does require the health behaviors, but we should know why we're doing them. And we're not just doing it to check off boxes on the list. We're doing it because we have a brief time to awaken from the forgetting that happened when we came into these bodies as conscious beings, and that's causing all our suffering, and realize that we are truly these limitless, miraculous beings. And so that's what drives me to eat the healthy food and to do the cold plunging and to walk, is that I want to create a structure that's able to essentially be an open channel to all that miraculousness. And that motivates me to keep doing it, and, it doesn't motivate me though, to just like make sure I've checked off the morning routine. And so I think the conversation has lost its way a little bit, and we need to deepen it and broaden it, um, and just, start to say no. Like we're not going to be acting in our health behaviors out of fear. We're going to be acting out of a deep knowledge that we're divine beings who want to make the most of this precious time we have as conscious beings.
Yeah, I love that you're saying all this and you're putting it in the book as well, because I was even at a biohacker expo this past weekend. It was just, every little thing you could do, the cold plunge, what's the latest stem cell and a V cell therapy, you could do all these things, but so much of it was missing the foundations of health and understanding what is your why, what is your purpose, what is your value, connection to others, that spiritual drive in you, right? Because otherwise you're just trying these gimmicks, these new technology pieces, and there's nothing to it almost. It almost seems you're just jumping from one to the other. You're not truly happy. Your markers may improve or go, but the foundations aren't there of health. And a lot of what you talk about is just, let's reconnect with nature. We are part of nature, and I think we've forgotten that. We stay
Yes.
indoors, we disconnect, we don't want to be. It's almost like we're shunning it, but
Yes.
we have to see that we are all part of nature. It's not any disassociation there. So that was really great to see this, because you hit the science, you go through the biochemistry and everything you've learned through the functional application of health and all these things, which was great. But then it still came back to, you still need the foundations there, right?
You do. And I think you just nailed it. And I think, when I think about, my purpose on this planet and the reason for this book, it comes down to exactly what you just said, which is it's about connection. It's about connection. And I think there's 4 main pieces of connection that we must internalize individually and collectively if we are going to have the future for humanity that we want. And the first is understanding the connection between really all the symptoms and diseases that we're suffering from in the Western world today, the metabolic connected underpinning between nearly every symptom and disease that is torturing the lives of ourselves, our children, and our parents. The second thing is we need to understand our connection between the body and everything else literally in the universe. We, like you just said, we are fully connected. We are nature. We are there's a Taoist saying that I love that I think we really need to internalize, which is that the human body is a process, not an entity. So we are constantly exchanging matter with the environment, soil, water, air, food, and really internalize the fact that there's no separation between us and everything else, and have that deep reverence and respect for that incredible miracle of connection. The third piece is really, really internalizing the connection between humans in loving, trusting, in-person relationships to be such a core part of our biology. So if we are social beings who are, and even that feels like a biohackery phrase, like fundamentally, even I think as spiritual beings, connecting with other spirits, and that interaction in person is absolutely dictates our biology. When we're in proximity to other people, it changes our biochemistry. And the interactions between people actually is what can help our own bodies generate chemicals that are basically like medicine. When we hug people we love, we become a pharmacy that generates oxytocin, which is a healing chemical. And so realizing that the connection between humans in person is critical, and to never again accept this idea that we should be that we're somehow helping humanity by separating from each other for long periods of time, like what we saw during the pandemic. And the fourth piece of connection that I think is critical is really meditating on that connection between life and death, and life and death, death and birth, and in a endless cycle, an eternal cycle that we are a part of, and that is nothing to be afraid of. And, we just have to meditate on the seasons. Like, we cannot have summer and spring without winter. And there's actually a beauty to it. Do we fear winter? No. We know that it's part of a cycle, and we're just a part of that as well. And so I think, connection between the symptoms of diseases, connection between us and the rest of the natural energetic world, the connection between humans, and the connection between life and death, those to me are the four pieces of connection that we have to deeply, deeply think about and internalize collectively and as individuals to create a foundation for the healthcare conversation that actually makes sense. Because if
Yeah.
it's not rooted on that, we cannot spend our way to an answer if it's built on the wrong foundation. So that connection piece that you brought up, I think is really, it's so critical. We've
Yeah.
got to stop seeking false gods in, these quick fixes and build the city, the empire on like a really strong foundation that's based in reality and truth, and not false premises like,
Yeah.
the body being an entity, not a
Right.
process. So yeah.
Yeah, and isn't it wild? Over the past few years, we've done the exact opposite of everything you said. We literally pushed ourselves into lockdowns, not seeing other people, doing everything digital like this, not going outside, no connection with nature, lower vitamin D levels, closing down gyms, no movement. I mean, all of these are like statistically shown now, like, oh, that was bad for it. Yeah, that was terrible for it. It was just a line of things that we were just creating this perfect storm, but we were following the science and experts. I think that's where people are also getting a little bit fed up. They are like, hey, enough. Our trust in politicians is one thing, but we can't even trust the doctors either.
Yeah.
And that's where people are starting to step up, and people like you, your brother, are, kind of pioneers in saying something is very wrong with this system. And you're right not to trust that. You should be looking, but there's another way.
Yeah.
And this book kind of pivots that. Is your hope that more people will start to question medicine, the healthcare system, and start to really empower themselves and say, hey, my health is my decision. It's on me. It's not up to these big pharmaceutical companies or doctors with different interests to, kind of look over and make the decisions for.
Yeah. I think it's not adversarial, and it's not about, I'm a doctor. I have so many friends who are doctors. I love doctors and I respect doctors. And I think that it's not about mistrusting people. It's about mistrusting systems and incentives that are driving a lot of our reality. And fundamentally, it's about asking people to recognize their intellect and power and really just start asking questions. I think it's become almost like the most dangerous thing you can do in our culture, to just ask questions. Like you start asking basic questions and all of a sudden you're being silenced on social media
Yeah.
or canceled. And so, but kind of helping to show people like it's not scary and it's actually critical, kind of helping people engender that confidence. And but I think, my hope is that fundamentally the energy behind all of this is not one of like, burn it down, but like
Mm.
more like it coming from love, like
Yeah.
fundamentally, like, we know that when we are in a state of love and more positive, like abundant type emotions, like everything feels better. We know that that's good for our health, but it's hard. It's our world is, because again of the incentives, like fear. We are wired to pay attention to fear. We are wired because it's for our safety. And so much of our culture has become so fear-based. So I'd say, as much as we can kind of disconnect from some of the sensationalism and actually just get back to that really abundant state of driving this journey through love. I mean, hopefully in a perfect world, like people would bring, in some ways, maybe bring their doctors along for that ride, like if they're coming at it in not an adversarial way, in a real sincere and earnest hope to make the most of this precious life, like I think the consciousness and energy around it can have a big impact on how this all plays out. So I think, you know, I really hope that collectively we can all just start to imagine what a brighter and different future could look like and get out of the fear trap that we're all in. I do believe in the power of our thought and our intention and our consciousness. And so what I hear so much in the world right now is just such deep pessimism and just so much like we're fucked, and it's just like it's so bad. And I think that that's a good start. Sometimes starting angry is a good place to start, but
Oh yeah.
fundamentally, like we need to get to a place of reimagining the future of humanity that is so much brighter. Because if we can't even imagine it, it's not going
Hmm.
to happen. And so, everyone listening, I hope that in a quiet moment today, in a meditation that you're doing, or as you're falling asleep, like let your brain go to a place of what humanity could look like in 50 years, where people are healthier and the children are healthier and relationships are healthier and the environment is better. And I think we have to let ourselves imagine that, or it's just not going to happen. Like, so, yeah. So, um, ask questions. If things are making no sense, like the fact that we're spending more money in healthcare and outcomes are getting worse, go down the journey of asking why. That's
Yeah.
very important. We all have the power to do that. And then I think coupling with that questioning and um, empowerment, also allowing yourself to believe that your own health can be incredible and the health of the world can be incredible, and build some of that positive collective consciousness that I think is going to be really critical for us actually turning the ship of, 8 billion people towards a better future.
Yeah, and those rabbit holes could be really fun to jump into, especially when you realize they're like, "Hey, I could do this. I could turn it around. Others have done this. This
Yeah.
isn't incurable. I don't have to live in misery."
No.
Those are fun ones to jump down. And I will say this because you wrote about this in the book, and I truly believe this, knowing, family members that are doctors. Everyone gets into the profession with an
Yes.
honorable intention of helping. I think the system, as you said, is broken and gears them into cynicism and what can I do sort of approach. And you feel handcuffed almost. And then you say, these are my options. When you're just handed a hammer, everything's a nail to you. So you have to go about it that way, right? But I do believe, as much as doctors are a little bit bound, at least they feel in the conventional realm, it's up to the patients to say, I want something different. If
Yeah.
that demand kicks in, doctors say, well, I got to. It's the whole
Yeah.
reason we know so many of these pharmaceuticals target the patients. They can't order the stuff themselves, but they can absolutely sway a doctor to say, hey, give me that drug. That's what I
Yeah.
want. All right, that's easy. I'll just write it. Hopefully it works for you, right? So I
Yeah.
do feel that the patient or the person going down this road, this journey of enlightenment, has a lot of power to actually change the whole healthcare system. Don't you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. I think coupled in this whole conversation is the entrenchment of the victim mindset, of the fact that we think that a lot of this stuff is happening to us and not really understanding the huge strong role that we actually have in creating this system. And I think it's it's so I'm looking at my bookshelf over here. There's just so many books that I feel like have helped me wake up to that. There's a book,
Yeah.
a really awesome sort of therapy type book called Maybe It's You. And it's
Mm.
like, it's not everyone else's problem. It's
Yeah.
maybe it's actually you. Maybe you're the problem. It's like the Taylor Swift song, I'm the problem, it's me. But we have to take ownership for our role in creating the systems that then hurt us. And I see it on every level. You know, in healthcare, this is just the way it is. Whereas like we actually have to gain the strength and mental fortitude to be able to stand on our 2 feet and ask for what we need and want. This happens a lot, I think, also in sort of like the, being a young woman, like we hear a lot about the patriarchy and all these
Mhm.
things that are happening to women. And something I frequently say is like, how are women propagating the system that they do, like, where are the women actually saying like, I don't accept this and I am
Right.
going to not participate in this and just create the world you want to see, instead of yelling at the system for somehow doing it to you. And so, I mean, of course there are terrible things that are happening, but we cannot ignore our role in creating the systems that then we complain about. And so, but that of course is a journey, because to have the confidence and the wherewithal to express your needs, set your boundaries, say what you are and are not willing to accept, and deal with the consequences, that's of course, that's a psychological journey that involves overcoming limiting beliefs,
Yep.
addressing childhood wounds that are creating patterns in your life, understanding how you're actually profiting and benefiting off the negative patterns in your life, all of these things. So that's the therapy, that's the counseling and the coaching and the psychedelic work and the dark night of the soul, to basically wake up eyes open to the ways that you are actually benefiting from the systems that you say you don't like. And I think for any of us and people who are listening who have been on that journey, you know that it is hard and it is worth it. Because if you don't know where how you're playing into your own suffering, like you basically are in prison for your whole life. And so I don't know if that resonates with you, but I think the chapter 9 of the book is called Fearlessness, the Highest Level of Good Energy. And I give 15 strategies in the book, from, psychedelic medicine to therapy to just reading the great thinkers on these topics, the poets and the philosophers who have talked about this stuff. How do we take ownership for our full autonomy as humans in this lifetime and break out of systems of oppression that we may actually be engaging in, because there is actually some way in which it helps us live in a smaller and more limited way, and we're afraid to be bigger. But we have to understand our power and limitlessness. But that is a journey of work, and we should all go on that journey. So that's really what that chapter is about, and it comes down right into the doctor's office. Like how this is a hard truth, but it's like, how do we actually benefit off of being chronically ill? Like, how does that let us be smaller and let us not have to show ourselves? And so that's a question we have to ask for ourselves, that's what that chapter is really about.
Yeah, no, I love that chapter. And I love that idea that real healing, it's difficult, it's hard, it's challenging, it's going to push you to your limits, but it's also transformative for your life. You're going to come out so much better, in a sense, on the other end. And it's going to lead you to a much more fulfilling life. That's just going to, really, really allow you to see through what your purpose is on this world, I believe. So, it's something that's necessary for all of us to go through, and everyone has their own journey. But in this book, you also lay out kind of the a little bit of a roadmap to get there. And you call it a 4-week plan to good energy. Do you feel that most people, maybe you could go into a synopsis of what that contains, but do you feel that most people could start turn things around within 4 weeks?
I do. I've seen I think people can start to turn things around within a day. When you change your mindset about it. Exactly. I mean, I think that's beautiful, Casper. It's like anyone who has taken an intentional deep breath knows that one breath can change your entire day.
Absolutely.
One hug can change your day. One moment of thinking like, actually the exact future that I want is totally possible can change your whole day. And so, yes, I do think that because of how rapidly the body is turning over, I think that, short interventions of really high quality living can have a massive impact. You have to remember, it's like the entire skin literally turns over, all the cells, all those atoms, all those molecules every week. Or I'm sorry, every 40 days or so. The gut lining is every week. And so we are just rapidly reinventing ourselves. So you can imagine if in a month you go from eating majority processed food, ultra processed food covered in pesticides, nutrient deplete, to whole foods from the farmer's market, meaning that they are going to have the most nutrients because they were picked recently, that you're preparing simply with high quality ingredients. A month of that, we eat 2 to 3 pounds of food a day. So that's like 100 pounds of high quality molecular material that's basically rebuilding your body. Of course, that's going to have a positive impact, and your microbiome can change in a day. So all those different things. So I do believe that it's possible. And I just think in my lab, in my working with patients, I don't see patients anymore, but it was just astounding to me that people could actually change, their triglyceride levels by 100 points in 6 weeks. They might have been up at the 250 range, which is very high, and could drop down to 150 in a month. Or people who had a fasting glucose in the pre-diabetic range, and they incorporated a bunch of, habits that essentially improved their insulin sensitivity, and they dropped right into the normal range in a month. And so the body's so dynamic that I think there's so much to be hopeful about. And 28, there's nothing magical about 4 weeks. I just think that what I really focused on with this plan was every aspect of our lifestyle and on the way we're living right now, every pillar of health is channeling through metabolic dysfunction, specifically mitochondrial dysfunction, to hurt our health. We are essentially, just backing up a little bit, like, metabolism is how we convert food energy to cellular energy, and that happens to the mitochondria. And the unique thing about our modern environments that's really crushing our health is that everything about our modern environment, from food, sleep, movement, stress, environmental toxins, light, and temperature, which I talk about all in the book, all of them are synergistically hurting the mitochondria. So we've got bodies that are no longer effectively able to convert this food energy to cellular energy. So we have this mass scale underpowering of our bodies, and that's showing up as all these different diseases, because underpowering in any cell type is going to look like a different thing. Underpowering, aka metabolic dysfunction in the brain, could look like migraines, chronic pain, depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, dementia, ADHD, depending on where that's happening at what stage of life. If it's in the ovary, it could look like PCOS. If it's in the blood vessels, it could look like heart attack, stroke, erectile dysfunction, retinopathy, all issues with blood vessels. So we've got all these lifestyle factors feeding through the mitochondria to create underpowered cells, which is leading to all these different symptoms. So the point of how that relates to the plan is that I don't really care where people start. Food, exercise, sleep, stress, toxins, light, temperature. Do what feels exciting to you and where you think there's room to improve in your life. So part of the plan is taking stock of which of those factors you're doing well on and which could be improved, and taking honest stock of all of them. Then just picking 3 of those areas, picking a habit that excites you, that you think that you can do. Because for some people, food is too hard to start with, but maybe they could start with movement or sleep or just getting rid of the toxins in their home. And I believe, and the research shows, that small wins beget more wins. So start with things that feel really alive to you. Tune into your body. What can you do for a month? And do it. And then I can almost guarantee that if you start to see some small improvements and wins and really tune in with your body, it's going to motivate you to start doing those other things. And maybe it unlocks that little bit of energy that lets you then attack the food or attack the exercise or whatever it is. So that's really what the plan is based on. But it's, take stock of where you're at, be really honest with yourself, pick a few things to focus on. Set up accountability mechanisms, whether it's with trackers or friends or coaches, and then really tune in with your body to see how you're feeling as you make those changes.
Yeah, I really like that idea of health. It shouldn't be a burden. It should be a joy. It should be things that bring you joy. For me, I'm not a big fan of the gym. I go, but I love playing tennis. So I go twice a week. I'll go later today, and I'm excited about that. And I'll sweat, I'll move, and I'll feel like a great workout. And I also understand that to you, your joy is in worms. Am I right there with worms? Look at that reaction of worms.
My worms are right outside. Oh my God.
I read that. I was like, okay, I got it.
Oh my God.
And it's amazing. You gave a long answer to the section too. And I was like, okay, yes, let's go into it. Worms.
It's so funny that you bring this up at this part of the conversation because it actually brings together literally everything we've talked about.
Good.
So, I have become a very passionate composter over the past year. And, essentially it's like we eat so much plant food in our house, and we end up having so much of this food, quote unquote, we call it food waste, right? Which is a total misnomer. But you put it in a bin with these composting worms, and each worm is eating that quote unquote waste and transforming it into nutrient-rich soil that we can put in the garden and to grow more food. And so it's this microcosm of everything we're talking about in this conversation, of transformation, of the alchemy of sort of molecular flow of the idea that like that death of that plant actually is transformed as something that creates new life. It gets me outside in the morning to basically put that food waste into the worms. I get to see the incredible life of thousands and thousands of worms who are, I know when they're happy and when they're doing well and they're not, because they respond to what they're getting. And it's just, one worm can basically convert its body length and weight per day of food into essentially worm poop, which is the compost, which is basically the most rich soil you could possibly
Right.
have. And to engage with that physically every day, that miraculous alchemy of transformation, and to get out of the ridiculous Western waste cycle that we have of
Mhm.
like consumerism and then discarding and then landfills, like it's totally unsustainable, right? And like, of
Absolutely.
course, yes, we still buy things on Amazon and I still do produce trash and I hate that and I'm working to reduce it. But to get a little bit out of that cycle, which is essentially the exact same cycle we have for the body as these little productive capitalistic workers. We're born, we work, we consume, we're discarded. When we're old, we're no longer useful and we're put in the homes, and then we die and we're put in a box in the ground, totally separate. Literally, a coffin is like a landfill, right? You're
Yeah.
not actually having this discarded human is not able to incorporate back into the cosmic flow of matter and energy. And that's what we're doing to food and trash and all that stuff. So, it also gets back to, I think in the book, I talk about my mom, when she passed away from cancer, she was very intent on having a natural burial,
Mm.
which is extremely rare in the United States. There are only a handful of natural burial sites. And you got to start thinking about this a little bit, because it's kind of wacky to think like, wait a minute, we have 8 billion people on the planet, and we're starting to create this whole, what I call the funeral industrial complex, which is
Mm.
basically like telling people that you have to pay all this money to be put in a box where you will never decompose and incorporate back into nature.
Yeah.
Almost, I mean, think about all of human history. There have been so many traditions that you just put the body back in the ground and
That's
it
it.
incorporates back into the soil. And it's part of that cycle and that beautiful transformation process. And we've just bought into this idea that like, no, 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 that's gross or something. And so what was fascinating about my mom's desire for a natural burial, which of course, given the way I think about things, like was very much what I wanted as well, is that I can't describe how healing it has been for my family to know that my mom, that molecular composition of my mother is back integrated into the cosmos. It's just
Mm.
like it's hard to explain how that would help the healing journey,
Yeah.
but I just have to say that it does, because there's a naturalness to it and a fearlessness to it of like purposefulness. Her body served a purpose of helping bring new life to the world, just like her spiritual energy while she was alive brought life to the world, and me and my brother, and in helping so many other people. And so it's this blocking of natural cycles and flow, again, that is something we don't recognize, that is so foundationally a part of why we are sick right now. Everything is not flowing in the way it's supposed to be in that circle of life, from the way we manage our trash, which gets into the worms, the way we manage our bodies at death, which gets into the sort of funeral industry, which gets into insulin resistance, which is fundamentally the block of flow of energy into our cells to be converted into human energy. So I think a big part of healing is going to be finding ways to let things re-enter cycles, natural cycles, and to flow. We need glucose to flow into our cells and turn into ATP. We need the body to be able to transform in a healthy way. And I think the little ways that we can help things flow in our own lives is to like speak authentically, speak our
Mm.
truth,
Mhm.
stop repressing everything you want to say because you're afraid of the repercussions. I just think everyone is self censoring. So, one, speak freely, dance, move,
Yeah.
walk, sing, scream. If you can't speak freely, write it freely in your journal. We gotta get back into flow. And to me, the worms basically help me see that on a very visceral way every single day.
I am so happy I asked about worms. I was like, should I leave that one till like not be on this? And I think that was wonderful. I thought that that is a poetic way to kind of sum up the book and everything we talked about. It is about flow. It is about authenticity, not being fearful of death, allowing life to happen and being one with nature. So, Dr. Means, thank you so much for this conversation. Where can people learn more about the book, pick up the book and read it?
Yes, the book is everywhere books are
Everywhere,
sold.
right? Yeah.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, hopefully in the small bookstores in your neighborhood. If you like the book, tell your small bookstore in your neighborhood to stock it. And I am on Instagram at Dr. Casey's Kitchen, on every other platform like Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. I'm Casey Means MD. My website is caseymeans.com. You can learn more about the book at caseymeans.com/good energy. I have a newsletter called Good Energy Living, which you can sign up for on my website. And I'm so grateful to have had this conversation. Thank you so, so much.
Amazing. Thank you again. Be sure to check out all those websites, caseymeans.com, for more information. The upcoming book entitled Good Energy. Until next time, continue writing your own healing story.